Well, if everybody's an embodiment or a manifestation of God in the world, and you're teachable and you're a student, right? And you're constantly refining each other, then every moment is a divine moment and has the potential to be entirely sacred. And I really believe that. And some of my most sacred moments have happened between the interaction and the human being. I mean, Buber talks about this, but it's even greater than that. I mean, how many unexpected people have refined you in ways that you never imagined, and vice versa?
That was Rabbi Sherre Hirsch, my friend and mentor, discussing the song The Ballad of a Ghost, which I wrote after being inspired by Psalm 20. I'm Shep Rosenman. This is The Rest is Commentary, where we discuss what songs inspired by the Psalms, or Tehillim, inspire in my guests. Sherre is a nationally recognized inspirational speaker. Her relatable approach communicating spirituality has been embraced by millions via her appearances on television and her award-winning books. She spearheaded Friday Night Live, Hillel Well, and Maven in her roles as Chief Innovation Officer of the American Jewish University, Senior Rabbinic Scholar of Hillel International, Spirituality Consultant of Canyon Ranch, and Associate Rabbi of Sinai Temple. She regularly supports and leads CEOs and lay leaders alike. In her spare time, she can be found surfing, practicing yoga, or investigating new technological advancements. She is married to Dr. Jeffrey Hirsch and resides in Los Angeles with their 4 children, foster son, and puppy. Sherre and I discuss what it's like to encounter the Psalms when you're not a fan of the literature. Rituals around death, the seemingly incongruous parts of a person, the possibility of finding the divine in each moment, the difference between optimism and faith, our debt to God, and so much more. Let's start off by listening to The Ballad of a Ghost.
Ghost appeared to Jose the man of Zathir. How many a year have I been hanging around here? By the sun at high noon and the light of the moon, I protect this lagoon from spirits rough hewn. Scare away all goblins and demons. Another my kind wants to evict me. It's got some ennui, wants to live violently. Take my guardian place, scare kids from this space. Light and joy debased. It will be a disgrace. Need your help to rid us of this demon. If a ghost needs some help, maybe I do too. Ain't afraid of no ghost, but I'm a bit afraid of you. If a ghost needs some help, maybe I do too. If I ask you for help, is that something you will do? Jose heard this story with eyebrows askew. He said, is there something I can do that will rescue you? The ghost thought for a time, said, look for a sign when red is intertwined with the water's top line. That's when you can get rid of that demon. Jose told this story to all the townsfolk. This isn't a joke, we'll weave a plan that's bespoke. Need to capture this loon, protect the lagoon, build a scheme to fine-tune before the new moon, to drive away from here this evil demon. If a ghost needs some help, maybe I do too. I ain't afraid of no ghosts, but I'm a bit afraid of you. If a ghost needs some help, maybe I do too. If I ask you for help, is that something you will do? Showed up at the first star of the morning with spades adorning and sickles a warning. With the day growing hotter, the mood getting tauter, they were ready to slaughter. When the blood floats on the water, time to say goodbye to that demon. The sign came just as they finished praying, their bodies swaying and voices are braying. Demon, we're beginning, soon we will be winning. Its power quickly started thinning, and the people started grinning. A helping hand is what cast out the demon. If a ghost needs some help, maybe I do too. I ain't afraid of no ghosts, but I'm a bit afraid of you. If a ghost needs some help, maybe I do too. If I ask you for help, is that something you will do?
There are people you meet in life where you just know that you were together at Sinai, not romantically, but just
no.
like, you were in the same chavrusa, in the same cheder in yeshiva or whatever it is, and you had a common purpose and built something together or appreciated something together. And I've always felt that way about you.
Thank you. I really feel that way about you because I feel like they're definitely, I don't think about it as people that I was standing with at Sinai, but, God has like a individual task for each one of us. And I definitely feel like there's groupings. And like when you're in your grouping, you feel it.
So in the same way that I was inspired by the psalmists, some of us say David, some of us not.
Right. Whoever the scribes were.
Exactly. I was inspired to write a song and I offered you that song. What inspirations, questions, curiosities, if any, did it raise in you?
I'm not a big fan of the Psalms. And you actually sort of opened my eyes to something that I hadn't. I mean, isn't that every chavruta, right? They open your eyes to something. But you opened my eyes to something that I was like, what is the story that he's telling me and why? So that was my first question.
Well, so first of all, I grew up, Psalms for me was Tehillim. That's what you said in moments of crisis in the community and before benching. Like before the grace after meals. Except that I always observed my dad reciting Tehillim every night before going to bed.
Really?
He would recite X number of chapters. I don't know how many. I knew once. But he loved them. And he was, in the same way that David is the sweet singer at midnight, my father said, okay, before bed, I'm going to say a bunch of chapters of Tehillim.
And he would literally just recite them?
Mumble is more accurate, but yes. Like my dad was not like a studier. I mean, he wanted to be, but study typically was a process of Uncle Normie or Gershon Tucker or somebody else coming over and leading over a yurtzeit, learning some Mishnayos. Friday night, my dad would come home from shul, we'd have dinner, and then he would sit in his chair. It was like it wasn't a rocker, but it was like a big chair with
a
footstool, thank you. And he would grab one of two books, either Chevelle, a commentary on the Torah, or Chorev. Is that Hirsch?
I think it's Hirsch, but I'm not positive.
One of three books. He also had the Ramban.
Wait, was he really like a peaceful man? Like he would come home and from shul and just like settle down and just...
No, well, this is after the meal.
Wow.
Okay, but let me finish the story.
Yeah, it's amazing.
Because it was one of those three books, or it was the Jewish Press. And within 5 minutes of beginning to read whichever one of those things, he'd be asleep. And then he'd dreamel, like he would start dream a little, and then he'd wake up, like with a quick head snap, and then he'd read another verse or two or 10. And
how long would that go on?
A couple of hours until my mother said, Morris, it's time to go up.
And then he would go up to bed.
Yeah.
Finally. And so you witnessed him doing this all of your childhood.
Yeah. When I was little, I would have the comics and the Helm stories and all the other kid-appropriate things from the Jewish Press. And then as I got older, I'd be reading whatever it was I was reading. I was not really a serious student as a kid. That came much later. I was into music, and that's what I wanted to do. But although my dad wasn't into the study of it, he was into the recitation and the connection with text, tradition, and God that comes along with immersing yourself in reciting
Would you
Tehillim.
sit next to him? Like, were you in his environment, like in his little...
Friday nights, absolutely. Like he'd be in his chair over there and I'd be on the floor, very close by. When he said Tehillim every night, he did that religiously at the kitchen table after davening Maariv. He was not a big minyan goer. So Maariv is the evening prayer. For those who don't know, I'm trying to avoid the inside baseball as much as possible.
Yeah, totally get it.
So when he would say the evening prayers, he would then follow that up with Psalms. Tehillim.
I just have this very visual, peaceful image of like your Friday night.
Friday night was pretty peaceful at our house unless my parents were arguing.
Yeah, but even so, it sounded like it always ended with him sort of on the sofa reading this Tehillim, sort of settling into the night.
Yeah, 1,000%.
I love that image. When you were talking, I was just thinking that I don't have a connection to the Psalms, and I never really thought about why until you were talking, and then it hit me like a bullet.
Why?
My granny, who I loved very much, I went to live with her for 3 weeks when my parents were in some state of separation. They were always having arguments and separating and coming back together. And I went to live with her for 3 weeks, and I loved her. I loved her. I was the only grandchild that did that because right after, she smoked like a pack a day. And right after that, she died of lung cancer. But right as you were talking, I never have thought about this, Shep. Like, thank you. When at her funeral, we made these lines. And everybody would stand and they were reciting Tehillim. And they were all mumbling under their breath. And I remembered thinking, like, what are they murmuring? What are they murmuring? And later I found out it was Tehillim, but I'm sure that impacted. I mean, I'm sure it was an imprint on me that was like, I don't like that. I associate the Psalms with death. And I absolutely associate them with death.
Yeah, of course. I mean, we say 23 and a variety of others at funerals.
I mean, how many Psalms do I say on a regular basis? I'm praying or I'm not, but it's like, I'm always saying them when I'm officiating a funeral. I'm always, no matter what, saying them when I'm doing death or vidui, which is like confession for people. Like I'm always, so as you were saying that, I was like, I don't want to do the Psalms. Right. I was like, why did he pick the Psalms? That's not what I thought. Like, who picks the Psalms? Like it's the writings.
So the Psalms came out of honoring my parents. So I grew up, I mentioned it before, when there was an anniversary of a death on a yurtzeit, Normie Yudi Toker and Erwin Weber and Anshi Klein and all these people would come over to our house, or Normie's house, it was in our family, and they would study Mishnah.
So you were like in this intellectual circle of scholars.
Pseudo. Some of them were real learners. Some of them This was the tradition. I was in a circle of people who honored the tradition, some of whom had the intellectual piece of it, some of whom, like my uncle, who was also a rabbi and loved learning, he was a joker, and so was Yudi Tokayer was the most serious of them. Erwin Weber was an even bigger joker than my uncle, like in the most respectful, loving way. But they were like, the learning wasn't the thing. It was the camaraderie that was the thing. So that's what I observed growing up. And when my mom died, I needed to figure out how to incorporate a tradition like that made sense for my family. So while I grew up modern Orthodox with all these traditions, Sherry did not. And like a group of guys around a dining room table studying Mishnah, an early rabbinic text. And the reason it's Mishnah is because it has the same letters as soul in Hebrew, which is neshama. That was not going to fly for Sherry, my wife.
Right.
I needed to create something that would be inclusive so that she could feel like she was honoring my mother's memory as well, and so that our friends could also feel like they were participating. And so I started doing something similar. It was inviting people in, to rabbis, friends, people who knew how to learn, sometimes me. We would do some learning in honor of my mom, and then, we would say Kaddish and do what you always do. You eat and drink.
Right.
So my dad died 7 years after my mom, 5 days apart on the calendar. So I began doing an annual thing for them.
In their memory.
And it would
around the Psalms.
It wasn't around the Psalms yet.
Oh, not yet.
Okay? It was just whatever. It was the weekly parsha, whatever I was learning. The Torah portion is the weekly parsha. Then the pandemic hit, and I had to figure out how to do this without having people present. And I'd done a lot of frontal teaching. I had, taught at the AJU, both for Ziegler and for Fingerhut. And I taught in my synagogue, but I just felt icky doing that in a Zoom context. So, or rather, I felt icky just doing that. That just felt too heady. So I said, you know what, I'm going to write a song, because I've been writing songs inspired by Jewish texts since the early aughts. Started at Camp Ramah, where I met you.
That's right. That was the time you started?
That year or the year before.
Wow.
So I said, my father loved Tehillim. Let me do something inspired by Tehillim, but then let me tell a story about my mom. So my first one of these was a song that's based on Psalm 91. And you mentioned the rows, the
Shirot,
right? That you walk between, and where people are offering you comfort, and some of them is through the saying of Psalms. And for my mom, my brother and I not only had to do the misos, the punishment, the punishments to all of the, both my parents were born in Jerusalem and they died there, and they had their,
I never knew that. Both your parents are Israeli.
1919 and 1924, I think.
Wow, I didn't know
Long time
that.
ago. Yeah.
Was Hebrew your first language?
Me? No. English was my first language, but my dad tried very hard to make Hebrew my first language, but my mother didn't speak it, so that was a fail. Yeah. They had us do the punishments, put rocks on my mom's eyes, and, hold with them a lighter to burn her finger. This is after she's dead, to represent the various punishments, so that when she arrives at the pearly gates, God says, you've had all your punishments. Come on in. I got your good seat. And after that, they invited us on the bus to go from Shamgar, where the eulogies took place, to the burial site on Har HaMenuchot. And it was my brother, me, and 10 Hasidic men in various types of Hasidic garb. And they were reciting Psalm 91 over and over and over. And it really moved me. And that is the psalm I chose to write, to honor my mother. And it ended up being that I told a story about my mother and connected it to the psalm, and that's that.
But then it made sense to continue with the Psalms because it was so deeply woven to their memory.
Well, so you got to that faster than I did. I was like, okay, that was a one-off.
Oh, but I have the benefit of hindsight.
Okay, fair enough.
when you play with more than one medium, you're really exposing yourself. So I was really touched by that.
Did you learn anything new about me from this
Oh,
song?
yeah. So the first thing I thought was about the layers of the earth. You know, it has all those different layers. I mean, I learned it in like 10th grade. I could never remember like which one was which, but like there was the hot one, the red one, the gray one, the black one, you know, but they were all these different ultimately to get to the core. And it was interesting to me that the song emanated not from the first, the second, or third crust. It was like not the core, but it was like from this midrash that was like deeply inside. So you had to do some work to get there. So it reminded me of you because you're very much, you know, transparent and out there, but there's a lot of layers to you. And also, I just thought it was also really kind of beautiful because it's like, wow, these are a lot of layers and they don't necessarily go together, which I already suspected about you because I think it's why we're in the same cohort from God. But people have a sense of where they categorize people and they do this, and this, and that makes sense. And then there are people that, as they say in Hebrew, lo hegioni. It doesn't make sense, right? Like, because they've got this part that's like super intellectual and they're a lawyer and it's like very, you know, legal and just. And then they've got this part that's super creative and artistic. And then they've got this Jewish part and then they've got this out of the box thinking part that normally don't go together. So it sort of confirmed for me what I thought you were, but it definitely confirmed it for sure. There's a beautiful scholar, a beautiful teaching that a scholar is exposed named Ben Summer. He's a biblical scholar. And he talks a lot about that we come into the world owing God, that we owe God a debt just for giving us life.
Yeah, it's beautiful.
That this debt is what we're constantly repaying. And that I really feel. And the first time he said it to me, or the first time I learned it when he was teaching, I thought, I feel that. I feel that sense of debt or gratitude to God that I owe something, that I can't just coast.
Yeah.
You know, I don't think you have this. I think you have the same gene.
1,000%. I mean, for me, it comes from, I think that they're saying the same thing. It comes from, even though I grew up modern Orthodox, both of my parents were born Hasidic. You know, my father went to a yeshiva in Mea Sharm. Then when they got to the States, they went to a shul called the Degel, but he was also, which is like a pan-Hasidic shtibel, a small group of people who got together without a formal leader. And then he would spend his Shabbat afternoons, or Shabbos afternoons more accurately, with the Shomer HaTzair.
Wow.
So for those who don't know, the Shomer HaTzair is the Zionist socialist youth from that period of time. And
right. Like you inherited this tradition of not fitting into a category.
Yeah. Like I'm a mutt. And,
right.
And as a result, where was I going with that? Oh, so for me, Ben Summer, is that his name?
Yes. Professor Ben Summer.
Professor Ben,
He was at he was at Northwestern and then JTS. Maybe he's still at JTS. He might be at Northwestern now.
Got it. So what he's saying, when we're born, we have this debt to God that essentially we have to pay God back for giving us life. That's at a minimum not unrelated to the way Hasidic and Kabbalistic views take a look at the world. It's our job to repair it. And I've said this elsewhere in other contexts. Why do we close out our prayers, all of them, except in a few traditions, with Aleinu, right? It's on us, right?
Correct.
What's on us? Well, it's on us to be responsible and go out there and specifically make God's name one. Why? Because once that happens, then everyone in the world will be on bended knee acknowledging God's oneness. So I think these concepts are deeply related. We owe God to say to the world, you know, hey, let's just engage with that which is greater than ourselves. Some of us call it God. Some of us call it community. Some of it call us the way, and so on.
Whatever you call it. I mean, that's the names for God. I just want to go there for a second, Shep. You know, there's over 88 names for God in just the Tanakh, just in the first 5 books. And I think about that, you know, call God whatever you want. Call him Jim, call him Fred, whatever. It's like, that's a messaging to us that it doesn't matter what you call it. Just live by something greater than yourself, right? Like, I don't care what you call it. So when people are like, it's not a she, it's not a he, it's not a her, it's a this. I mean, it's like, I can't really relate to that because I feel like, call it whatever you want. You know, God is expansive. And if God is limited, then you don't need to name it. Sometimes the name doesn't even work, right? We're bound by the limits of what language gives us.
Well, what's God's response when Moses says, what's your name?
Yeah, sure, yeah.
I will be what I will be.
Yeah, that's not a response. That's not even like, that's not a name. That's not like a phrase. Like that's a whole other category.
Yeah.
So to me, it's like, ugh. But I definitely think that now it's more about urgency and about living each day like it matters, you know, really like it matters.
That's okay. As someone who spent a lot of time with Thoreau and those writers, I strongly was impacted by the need to be able to be a rugged individualist. Not that I ever lived in the mountains in a cabin without electricity, but having that kind of ability to do things on your own. As a songwriter, my first impulse is, okay, read the text, write a song, record the song, play all the instruments. Okay, I'm going to bring an example from our work together. You do not need other thinkers. You've got a big brain. You really don't need anybody. However, you choose to surround yourself with people to challenge your thinking. You did not need anyone in that room, and you had a lot of very interesting, accomplished, smart people in the room, but yet you chose to ask us to challenge your thinking, to help you construct something. So you had both. You have the capacity to be the rugged individualist, but you're also unafraid to ask for help. And to me, that aligns with what I think is the essence of Jewish learning, which we do bichavruta.
Correct.
Right? So bichavruta means in a pairing, a traditional learning style where it's two people. But the root of the word is chaver. Friend, which goes back to this issue of vulnerability. Like you have to be vulnerable to each other and challenge each other. Otherwise, you're not going to come up with something better than you can do on your own.
Right. And you have to be teachable. I mean, I feel like that's one of the words, whenever I'm hiring people, I'm looking for, are they teachable? And I'm also looking for, do they have courage? Because you have to also be courageous to say no to someone that's possibly superior to you in your work. And I find I work with a lot of people that want you to agree with them.
Yeah.
I was recently in a situation, I'll share this with you, Shep, and someone said to me, you don't listen. And it was so funny because, you know, when something really resonates with you, it kind of it hits you like a knife and you're like, ooh. If he had said to me, you're impatient, I would have been like, you are correct, right? But I'm a really good listener.
Yeah.
That's like actually one of the things I really pride myself on. And I've loved listening. It's like not even just something that I'm good at. It's like I pride myself on it because I love it. And then it occurred to me, what I said next was, I'm listening. I'm not agreeing with you. Then I saw this person had the look of the knife had gone through their chest, right? Which was the truth. And I realized to myself, like, if you'd said I was impatient, I will own that because I am one of the most impatient people I've ever met. But listening, no, I don't agree with you. And the thing is, I tend to surround myself with people that are better than me and people that are courageous and unafraid to disagree with me. And it's really important to me that I do that because then I'm teachable. And my father, you know, I'm just thinking about it for a second. My father used to reward us for more that we could make an argument against him. If we could prove him wrong, we were more rewarded.
How did that feel?
I mean, it was a game. It was an amazing game. I mean, my brother was brilliant at it. My brother and I were both futurist. We always have thought about the future, but my brother was brilliant at it because I could be right behind him, but he was funny too.
Mm-hmm.
Like he could not only prove my dad wrong, but he could also make it very funny.
Right.
And I was a little bit envious of that skill, but it was a challenge. It wasn't about agreeing with him. It was about not agreeing with him. And the more adamant we got, the more he would argue with us. I mean, it's very Talmudic, but I didn't know it at the time.
Was your dad a Talmudist?
No, my father was raised in a religious home, conservadox.
Mm-hmm.
His brother became a rabbi. His father went to rabbinical school, but didn't become a rabbi. His uncle was a rabbi. So he had a lot of family members. Cousins were rabbis. There was 14 of them. But my father was told to be a doctor. He was the second son, very traditional family. And he went to college and he failed out because he wasn't a doctor. But on the side, he used to go to the business school at Ohio State and TA for the business school teacher.
Wow.
And so he never finished college. He went to like a year. But on the side, he always worked at the business school and loved it. His father had the courage to say to him, look, you're not supposed to be a doctor. You're not academic in that way.
Right.
But you're very, very smart and you could be a great entrepreneur. Then my father would have thrived in college, but he never went to college. And that was always very hard for him.
Yeah, I understand. But he ended up going into business?
He ended up going into business. My father's a complicated story. When I listened to the story of your father and how peaceful he is, I would say my father was the antithesis.
Well, I want to be clear. My father was not peaceful. I mean, he had a serious temper. My brother and I are 19 years apart. He would, hit my brother, never hit me. But he had a soft spot in his heart for me. But when he was impatient, he would express it. Slam the door when he was angry at my mother and go for a walk for an hour. But that was not the norm. But there was this dangerous, uncomfortable presence.
Dysregulated.
Yeah.
Yeah, I call it dysregulated.
Yeah, and I think that's the right word for it. And, he was impatient with customers. He was a printer, certainly impatient with my Uncle Normie. But that was just one strand of who he was. He was also the reliable one. He was always there for siblings and, he served the community in his way. Free stuff, cheap stuff for the shuls, for the camps. He was definitely not a Buddhist monk, like meditating.
I don't know many Jews that are by nature Buddhist monks.
Yeah.
I think many Jews want to be, but I don't think it's our natural instinct.
Yeah. Well, this is why we always ask for peace at the end of our prayers.
Yeah. My dear friend, Mel Zuckerman, who's founded Canyon Ranch, he wrote a book and it was called The Restless Visionary. And I thought it described every Jew that is out of the box, right? We're restless. We got the spilkies is the word, and I remember my mother used to say to me, stop with the spilkies, because I was moving and thinking and ideating and creating. I mean, I didn't have those words at the time, but those were the words that I now assign to that.
Sure.
Just I had the spilkies.
Another way, we were at Sinai together.
Correct. That's why when you asked me at the beginning of this, what's the one thing you would be doing? I got the spilkies.
But how does connecting people solve the spilkis for you?
I love seeing people elevate by each other. I just love it.
Mm-hmm.
I love it. It's the greatest thing when I manage people. I love managing people because you empower them, you teach them if they're teachable, and then you let them do their work. And then they come back to you unbelievably more powerful than you ever imagined them possibly to be. And then when they get that to me is like, oh my God, that's God working in your life.
Yeah, you're raising an entrepreneur.
Yeah, I just love it. And I see it so frequently. And I can recognize so quickly when someone's not teachable.
That's a gift too.
Yes. That fixed mindset, that rigidity, that is, people say to me like, oh, that's a great worker. And I'm like, yeah, not for me, not teachable, because I'm uninterested in someone just doing their job or just executing on the work. I'm interested in someone being Havruta, teaching me and learning, right?
Yeah. Over the years, I mean, I've had many, many assistants, a lot of lawyers come through the firm, and I've worked in the kind of nonprofit, the Jewish context. And it's a fascinating conversation. The impulse when you're with the wrong person is to say, give them time to succeed. And the answer is sometimes yes. But I was powerfully impacted by Jim Collier's book, Good to Great. And he uses this image where he says, if you have the wrong hire, get them off the bus. He uses the bus image. Like, you only want the right people on the bus with you. And specifically, he says, and he does not use the word Rachmanos, but he says the more compassionate approach to them. Like, you think you're being compassionate by leaving them the opportunity to succeed for too long. But you could be much more compassionate by saying, you're not a good fit.
I think about that all the time. And especially, Shep, my example when I was younger was dating. You break it off when it's not right. But if you keep going back and forth and not and calling out, you're giving really, really mixed messages.
Yeah.
And it's not fair to a person. It's not fair. And by the way, you're depriving them of the ability to meet someone else. You're
Opportunity cost.
Yeah, it's an opportunity cost lost. And so, hire and fire, right? And you don't usually hear that from women, right? Women are like, oh, give them a chance. And I've worked in a man's world most of my career. But I have some of those assigned male traits that in this body are criticized, right? Because I'm the one that should be in the meeting saying, let's give her another chance. And I'm like, let's cut our losses, right? And so that's always been a challenge, being a feminist and also being in this body.
How do you manage that?
I don't know. I'm still learning. I don't know. I think that it's very challenging I think we struggle so much with gender, and it was never an issue for me. I really, truly believed if I was just good, it wouldn't matter. And as I get older, I'm seeing it does.
By good, you mean good at what you do?
Yeah, good at what you do. I just really thought it doesn't matter that I'm the one that's like fire because I can see it. So fire, right? And then it was like, but that's not supposed to come out of your mouth.
That must have been hard.
Yeah, it's always been hard for me. It's something it's like I don't want to play the gender card, but it's always been hard for me because the amount of gender conversations I've had, because I have these traits that are typically associated with men, and yet I'm very feminine and very female. And it's like I don't fit into the box.
Right.
And so people can't put the visual box with the personality box, and then they're upset. And that's always been hard for me.
So what do you do to help yourself manage that? Because you must come up a lot. I mean, the institutions you've worked at have had a lot of strong personalities, male and female.
Yes. But I usually am with men most of the time, and I report to a man. I mean, in most of the jobs I've been in. I struggle. I think sometimes it's about containing yourself. That's very hard for me because if you're a futurist and you see things, I don't know if you saw the Queen's Gambit. Remember that?
Sure. It was great.
Oh my God, it was beautiful. But at night, she imagines the chessboard and she can see it in her mind's eye. And I started to cry the first time I saw that. I realized that's how I think.
Amazing.
It was a visual imagery of how I think. I can see the chess moves.
Do you play chess?
No, which is so weird because as a kid, no one ever said it to me. But I was very mathematical. I loved analysis. I loved all those things. So I probably would have been a good chess player, but I never even was exposed to it. I didn't come from an intellectual home. So everything about school and learning came from that. I went to this very shishi private school that my brother and I were accepted into. We were one of the very few Jews there.
This is in Ohio?
No, this is in Los Angeles, a school called Chadwick.
Got it.
Very few Jewish kids. We were for sure the only Jewish kids that celebrated 2 days of Rosh Hashanah. I mean, there were Jewish kids, maybe, but for sure they didn't even know what 2 days of Rosh Hashanah were. But all my academic drive and my learning came from this institution. And I just remember them once saying, it's not about going to college, it's about what graduate school you're going to. And my father hadn't gone to college. My mother went much later in life. It wasn't even like she went to the University of Dayton. It wasn't like Penn and Harvard. And here they were like, yeah, it's assumed you're going to go to an Ivy League, and then we're going to talk about which graduate school. I mean, it was such an intellectually stimulating place. I don't even know how I got there, but that drive to be learned and to learn and to be curious and teachable all came from this environment that it was a given.
Your parents chose that place for a reason, so they probably had that inclination or recognized its value.
100%. I think they fought about it. It was expensive. And some years my dad didn't pay, and then I wasn't allowed into class. And then the headmaster would let me go into class because I would say to him that I would make the money. And one year I did. I mean, there's so many stories to that. But I think that my mother knew that education was the ticket out of mediocrity and out of being less than. And I just loved it. I mean, when my kids complain about going to school, it's hard for me to relate. I get a little bit like, are you kidding me? Like, what's wrong with you? And I get it. They're a different child than me. They're living at a different time. They have so many different, but for me, school was sanctuary and learning was sanctuary. I used to just think my teachers were gods.
I love that connection. You know, the ability to teach someone, whether it's in a classroom setting or in an employment setting, whether it's the senior to the junior to the senior, that act is divine. The act of educating. And it goes back to what you were saying before, being able to educate God. There's another song I wrote about this. I talked about it with my friend Jim Wright, where there's a midrash that basically asks the question, can you educate God? And that's what the song's about.
A raised hand asks for guidance. Can we teach anything to God?
So if your view is that every day is about educating God, I mean, look, and in this other song that I wrote, you know, I posit, like, pick a big thing that needs fixing. Like, there's a lot to do, God.
Correct.
But you can, you know, get this one right.
Well, if everybody's an embodiment or a manifestation of God in the world, and you're teachable and you're a student, right? And you're constantly refining each other, then every moment is a divine moment and has the potential to be entirely sacred. And I really believe that. And some of my most sacred moments have happened between the interaction and a human being. I mean, Buber talks about this, but it's even greater than that. I mean, how many unexpected people have refined you in ways that you never imagined, and vice versa?
It happens in the unintentional, the casual. It happens when you pass the homeless person on the street on the island between the two sides of Burton Way or at the underpass, whatever it is. They have the capacity to educate you even by doing nothing.
Correct.
Right? Because they're reminding you, I want to give. You may not have money in the moment. You may not have granola bars in the car, but they may have impacted you and educated you that way.
When I first started dating my husband, you know, everybody says, look at how he talks to the waiter. And my husband, you know, he's a Southern boy. He talks to everybody like, you know, miss and, you know, with all these. So I was like, I can't look at how he talks to the waiter. But we walked by a person wearing a service uniform. And almost under his breath so that I couldn't hear, he whispered to him, thank you for your service. And I remembered thinking, like, he sees everyone.
Yeah.
That's our job. We got to see everyone. Now, married him for 22 years. I don't need him to see so well. I wouldn't mind a few things that he could be blind to.
But it sounds like you have both of those. You both have this thing where you see people and you engage. He may do it under his breath more quietly, and you may have a full-blown conversation. And he has the capacity to both engage, but also say, don't put yourself in a dangerous situation. It's a lot of balancing.
I would say I drive more by faith. He drives a little bit by fear. He's definitely a person that feels that there's danger in the world and we have to protect ourselves and we have responsibility to do that. And we have guns. You know, we've all learned how to use guns. I mean, he really feels that in a very deep place. I respect it very much. And it's funny because he grew up in a home that was very secure, financially, emotionally, and all those things. I grew up in a home that was not financially secure, certainly not. Emotionally secure, certainly not. Physically not secure, certainly not. So, but I'm the one that feels tremendous faith and security. Like, it'll be okay. To the point that he has to say, like, Sherry, it's not okay.
Right.
You know, like, I'm like, leave the door open. And he's like, no, don't. Like, and I would say we argue sometimes over it because he's like, I know that you want to believe that all people are good. And you really believe that people would sit there and have consciousness, but not all people are.
Right.
And so we do have a little bit of words over it.
But that's okay. I mean, that's your chavruta with your husband. I mean,
but it's not optimism. Know that.
For you or
no,
for
it's
him?
not optimism for me. It's more about faith. Optimism is like everything's going to be great. Everybody's good. I don't believe that. There are people that are not good. I think we have all kinds of illnesses and mental illnesses. Fine. But I think it's about faith.
And again, this touches on another song I'm writing with another friend of mine named Michael Sheffrin. You would hate it because it's hardcore. It's very heavy.
Oh, no, I wouldn't like that.
Right. But, and by the way, it uses the title of your book. It's as part of our chorus, you know, humans plan, God laughs.
Make a plan.
But the denouement, the culmination of this song is choose faith, right? So you don't, optimism is, if you will, it's an impulse. There's
Correct.
no choice. But choosing faith, that's powerful.
Jonathan Sacks, may he rest in peace, said that faith is the courage to do things regardless of the consequences. And I always think about that because it's like, optimism is like, it's going to turn out okay. I think a lot of things don't turn out okay. That doesn't mean I don't have faith, right? So that's okay too. Things cannot turn out okay and it still not break my faith.
Yeah.
You know, my father died at 58. My mother died at 64, both from very, very tragic illnesses. My father had pancreatic cancer.
Oy.
My mother had brain cancer. Both of them are literally terrorists. They're disease that I call terrorists because they have no regard for themselves. They have no regard for the host. And people always ask me, of course, that just broke your faith. That's not really where I went. You know, it, of course, made me question and deepen and struggle, but it didn't break my faith. It allowed me to refine it.
Right. And you were young when they both passed?
Very, very young. Very unexpected. They were both perfectly healthy and they were very young parents. They had us remember, they didn't really go to college. So what do you do if you don't go to college? You get married and you have kids.
Right.
So they were 20 by the time they had us. And I think about that now and think, oh my God, my kids, they could not be parents at the moment. But they were kids having kids. And people say it was a different time, but they were really children having children.
Yeah.
And I think there's a real gift to be able to say, to have your own childhood and to give your child that childhood and then let them be an adult in the right hour. And I feel very fortunate that I think my husband and I have been able to do that for our own children.
Yeah. How old are they now?
Oh God, there's so many of them.
Yeah, that's it. We've got time.
13, 16, 18, 20. And then we got our bonus foster son when he was 15 and he's now 23.
Wow.
So they go from 13 to 23.
Range.
Yeah.
Given that your parents died young, did it, you said before that it didn't break your faith, but did it change your faith?
For sure. For sure, it changed my faith. I mean, every experience shapes your faith, right? Every possible interaction shapes you. And I don't mean to be so esoteric about it, but you are not the person you were 60 seconds ago, right? And that is mind-boggling to me. Like, if we can really set aside our ideas of what people were 5 minutes before, then we can be open to who they are now, right? So it literally obliterates this idea of like, I don't like that person, right? Because you don't know what that person's supposed to teach you.
Right.
And so I think every interaction, but I think, of course, dramatic, traumatic, significant incidents in our lives have a more obvious effect on our psychological and emotional well-being.
And in the wake of your parents' death, do you think that it changed given the range of your kids, did it change the way you engage with your kids?
I would say more what changed. I had my own brush with death last year, I think you know, and I had a heart attack. I want to say small heart attack, but as my doctor said, you know, you can't be a little pregnant.
Right.
So heart attacks are heart attacks. And I think that more changed the way I interact with my kids, because the second thing I thought lying on the ground, the first thing I thought was, oh my God, I've had such an extraordinary life. Thank you, God. And I'm so glad I had that thought because there's a before and an after, and it's divided my life into part 1 and part 2. It's all been good. So I'm good. Everything else is now good. It's a bonus. The second thing I thought is, oh my God, this is really going to mess up my children. And the fact that they came second really surprised me. Really surprised me. I mean, I think to other mothers and women, it's like, of course your children comes right at the top of your mind. But I wasn't always that kind of person. I don't know. There's a lot of other things I could have thought before that. And they came up right away. And that surprised me.
And did that surprise manifest once you healed, obviously, and thank God you did?
Thank you. I appreciate that. I thank God for that and the doctors and everybody.
Did your behavior, your attitudes towards them change?
100%. 100.
Can you give us any specifics?
Yes. And it's so weird. When I was a kid, I didn't want to be a mother because I felt we were a burden. My brother and I were a burden to our parents. And my father used to say it often. I think we were. I don't think that was a lie. I think it was a burden. And I think it was very hard for them. And I think they were kids. And I think my brother was very dysregulated. And I think that taxed their marriage. And so I do think that kids for them. And so I didn't want to have kids because I didn't want to be a burden with them. And then when I got older, there was something about me that wanted kids. And I didn't know what that was. But I never felt like I was going to be Sally Homemaker, like with the cookies and this. And I always had a career. So I never felt like children were my number one identity. They were the definition of why I was here. I never got that feeling. I got more of them like, this is my people and this is my family and this is my community. So having this heart attack, I realized, oh my God, no, I really want each one of them deeply. And they are very much a part of my identity. And I love them more than I ever imagined. And so I thought it would manifest when I was in the hospital thinking about this. I thought it would manifest that I would never leave the house without saying, I love you. That so doesn't work because first of all, I forget. And second of all, they're like, whatever, mom, they're teenagers, It manifests in the way I express care for them.
Mm-hmm.
I've let them be even more themselves than I was before.
Amazing.
Much more so. I'm like, it is what it is. I'll be what I'll be.
Right.
I'm much more, and I'm not sure that's the right way. I think some of the parents that demand more and are more restrictive and have very strict sort of guidelines for their children somehow meet those guidelines and reach for those things. But I really got okay with who they are.
So it connects to a midrash where the midrash around creation, God says to the angels, shall we make the human, right?
And they're like, no.
Some
yes,
piece
say
says
yes,
no.
Yeah.
Exactly. And Rabbi Sachs, whom you mentioned before, has a beautiful interpretation of it. But it ends with, because some are saying yes, some are saying no, God unbalances the no's and yes by taking truth and throwing it to the ground and says, let truth arise from the earth, right? And so the point of the Midrash is, this is the human task, to try to come to truth. Your truth, God's truth, the
right.
combined
There's not
version.
One truth,
right.
The truth, the big thing.
Right. And I mentioned the Kutzker Rebbe. He used to, this one? He used to walk around with 2 pieces of paper.
Oh yeah. This is.
Please.
No, you say it. You're
okay.
better.
He used to walk around with 2 pieces of paper in his pockets, and his students would say, Rebbe, what's with the papers? And he finally explained one day. He said, in my right pocket, I keep ani afar va'efer. I am naught but dust of the earth. Right? In my left pocket, it says, ha'olam nivra bishvili. The world was created for me. So the students are like, well, I don't get it. Well, those 2 things don't align. Well, how do you know which one to choose? And he said, that's our task in life. Right? So it's always the striving for that truth by recognizing these polarities.
Yeah, and trying to figure out where you fit every single day between them. And I do carry a little piece of paper in my pocket. Not in my pocket, but in my purse.
What do they say?
I change them out.
Amazing.
Yeah, I change them out depending on what I'm learning. And I've just always, once I learned that by the Kutzker Rebbe, I always just carried a little piece of paper and I change them out all the time.
That's beautiful.
And they're my own little private teachings. And every time, usually a new one will go in and then one will get distorted. You know what I mean? It'll just get roughshod, or a new thinking is in with me and I'll put it in there.
Well, thank you so much for doing this. May you continue to have these papers in your purse, and may they evolve. May you continue to evolve. You've evolved wonderfully so far, and I can't wait to see what's next.
Thank you, Shep. I loved being here.
Thank you. Thanks so much for listening. Special thanks to Rabbi Sherre Hirsch for joining me, and to Emil Stern for his help in producing this episode. You can find The Ballad of a Ghost and all of the other songs in this song cycle on most platforms that stream or download music, including Spotify and Apple. In the next episode of The Rest is Commentary, I will be talking with Rav Hanan Schlesinger, one of the founders of Roots Shorashim Judur. This amazing group unites Israelis from the settler community and Palestinians living in the West Bank/Judea Samaria through nonviolent cooperation, building bridges for a brighter future. We will be talking about loyalty as a value, what to do when values conflict, grassroots peacemaking in Israel and Palestine, the founding story of Roots Shorashim Judur, the sources of evil, introspection and repentance, the challenges of interfaith dialogue, Zionism and Jewish collective identity, fear and trust in daily life, and so much more, all inspired by Rav Hanan's thoughts after listening to It's Late at the Bar, inspired by Psalm 30. Please join us.